You know, when you come across a name like Biv, you instantly pay attention. I did, because he came highly regarded from former podcast guests of ours. Now I suddenly realize it's Bill the Fourth. Biv, welcome to our show. How are you doing?
Thank you, Mark. It's nice to be here.
Are you kidding? You know what? You sent me this presentation, and I was like your typical golf junkie. And I looked at this, I'm like, wow, that makes so much sense. So, but before we dive into the putting and the putting on surfaces, because it's topical with TGL and practicing indoors and then going to play, I just want to quickly put you into context for all of our viewers and all of our fans that listen to this thing. Tell us about Biv Wadden. How do you become one of the foremost minds in golf instruction?
Well, that might be a little bit of a stretch, but I played competitive golf in high school and college. My father was a golf pro.
Mhm.
I grew up around golf instruction. I played at Notre Dame, and I was good but not great. I top 10, a number of events while I was there. One runner-up finish. But I don't know if you know Gary Hallberg. Do you know Gary
Mhm.
Hallberg at all?
Yeah.
He was
Oh,
the number one player in the country in college by a wide margin, and very good friend of mine. I played many, many, many rounds of golf with him growing up, and it didn't take long to figure out that he was going to play on the PGA Tour someday,
mhm.
and I was not. And uh, uh, I was a good student. I was a finance major at Notre Dame. I went into finance. I was in institutional asset management for 27 years before I took my suit and tie off and decided to teach golf. Uh, One of the reasons that's relevant is, uh, along the way, I got a graduate degree from the University of Chicago. I got a really strong academic background
Mhm.
in a lot of technical, time series analysis, statistics, econometrics, just all the calculus underneath option pricing theory. And I ran research groups.
Okay.
In addition to being a portfolio manager and a decision maker for large scale bond portfolios, I ran research groups. I had PhDs report in math, finance reporting to me.
Mhm.
And the reason that's relevant is, 7 or 8 years ago when the biomechanics craze came along. And so we're all going off to learn from, Sasha McKenzie and Young-Hoo Kwan and
Mhm.
Mike Duffy at Penn State, um, Phil Cheatham. I was off doing all that. And I, uh, I did have a much greater comparative advantage than all of the rest of the golf pros that, I knew and was, befriending in terms of reading all of the academic literature
Yeah.
and being able to both read those articles and understand them. And it's always a struggle, to read through those things. But if I gave it the struggle, I could do it. And so um, we're going to talk a little bit about this, putting putt
Well,
trajectory model I created. But uh, it it that all that effort has really, really helped my teaching. 15 years ago, I started teaching. I got my Class A, PGA status about 10 years ago. And by the way, I teach in the western and northern suburbs of Chicago. As I shared with you earlier, I'm relocating to the western suburbs of Philadelphia. I'm not sure how much teaching I'll do here, but I get back to Chicago often enough, and I intend to do, uh, you know, as much teaching as I can,
gotcha.
geographically manage, which won't be much, but
Well, that's the perfect segue, because up in the northern climes here in the United States and certainly across the world, um, winter golf is sometimes, most of the time, for most people, is done indoors.
yes.
So why don't you flip on your screen? Because folks, Biv has got a really sweet deck, kind of a presentation he's put together. And while you're doing that, Biv, I want to just summarize something here. This is from your website, and this is what caught my attention before we get into putting on artificial and real greens, or versus real greens, the comparison, the contrast. And this to me perfectly encapsulates who you are. And I want to tee you off this and then let you dive in. You say here, what sets you apart with your philosophy is your detailed attention to fundamentals and sound biomechanics.
Thank
And you know, as I encounter the fields of both as they're now merging in our game, you get people that sort of go, well, I'm one side or the other. And then you get the old school folks pointing at the research people saying, well, you've never done it under pressure. And then you got the other folks pointing it back at them going, well, what you've been teaching is fake and myth of your entire career. And you could have, you really are a cool bridge between those two environments. So I'm keen to dive in. So folks, you need to go see this on YouTube. There's a sweet presentation on the go. We'll do our best to make this audio as well. So why don't you tee us off, Bill? The title here is Putting on Artificial versus Real Greens.
Yeah, and by the way, I just want to point out for your listeners, the way you and I connected was through the putting instructor James Jankowski, who you've had on the show, and James and I have become good friends over the last 5 years. I've done a lot of work to rebuild his golf swing. He's gone from kind of a 0+1 to at least a +5. He's just gotten a lot better. I want to go through what we're going to talk about on artificial real greens. Is I do a lot of techie putting research.
All right.
I speak every year at David Orr's annual putting conference, and I just do a lot of nerdy stuff. So I want to touch on this nerdy stuff. I'm hoping we have a few minutes though for in the end for me to touch on what I did with James, because it's going to get there is a very important point I can help make about sound biomechanics that I think may help some of your listeners cut through some of the faddish stuff being taught.
Okay, careful, because if you tease folks, they will forward and go past the putting stuff. So let's get
yeah, that's okay. So watch this. Let's try to move through this part fairly quickly, and then I have to. Oh yeah, here we go. Now I got to figure out there. Oh,
there we go.
Okay, hang on. Okay, now look at this story starts with the Stimp meter.
Okay.
What a lot of people don't realize is the Stimp meter. There's three phases to the ball roll. There is what's called this, like getting the ball up and out of its initial, depression in the green.
Mm-hmm.
That friction is called the static friction, and we don't really measure that because it's kind of absorbed in what's known as the impact ratio, the ratio between the putter head speed and the ball speed. That's like the smash factor, on a TrackMan. And anyway, but it's there, it exists. And then the two other frictions that many of your viewers will be familiar with, there's a skid phase. The first kind of, 18 to 30 inches of the balls, kind of like launch and bouncing and skidding. And then what happens is the ball finally connects to the ground. It ends up being consistently connected, the bottom of the ball to the ground. And that moment that happens is when the ball goes into, in quotes, pure roll. And so you'll hear these phrases, and anyone who gets a little bit techie with putting instruction will kind of learn about the skid phase versus the pure roll phase.
All right.
The Stimp meter, we roll, here's a Stimp meter here, okay, and there's a little notch. We put the ball in the notch and we raise this. The ball goes down this Hot Wheels track and it rolls, and the number of feet it rolls is the basically the Stimp reading in feet. So that Stimp, when the ball hits the ground, the ball is in pure roll. Okay. And so the Stimp meter doesn't know about the skid phase.
Okay.
So when we are doing, let's say we stimp an artificial green and it stimps at 10. And we stimp a real green and it stimps at 10. The mistake everybody makes is those greens are going to be the same speed. Well, no, they're not. And it's quite pronounce how different the speeds are.
All right.
And it owes to the fact that the Stimp meter just, you're not hitting a golf ball where the golf ball is kind of like launching, bouncing, and that whole launch and bounce and sliding before it goes into pure roll just isn't factored in. And so what I'm going to talk about here is, I'm going to advance this correctly. Here's a picture, and there is a product out there. By the way, I have, over the years, I've acquired all of the, sophisticated putting analytic systems. So there's the Quintic ball roll monitor. There's Sam Putt Lab. There's Capto. There's a new product called, Versus, and then there's Blast, and those are kind of in the toy category. But this data comes from Quintic.
Okay.
Is a lot of people use when they're getting their putters fit. They're using Quintic to figure out how much spin, either forward or backward, is, coming off with the ball coming off the putter head. And this is a graph out of the Quintic ball roll monitor that shows the ball speed on the vertical axis and the distance in inches along the horizontal axis. So, if you go to the upper left, you hit the putt, and the ball launches into the air. And so we see that speed relatively constant and smooth.
Yeah.
And then, and in this putt, it goes about 4 3/4 inches before it touches the ground. But at first touch, you see that large decline in the speed. All those red dots, they drop like a rock.
Yeah.
Okay. And then it's, then it bounces again, and it's kind of the speed's somewhat constant because it's up in the air. And then there's a second touch. And and then boom, the friction from the second touch basically slows the speed. And then it's back up in the air, third touch, and then it kind of slides. And these screens end at 16 inches. Quite often, the full length of the skid distance is beyond the 16 inches that Quintic measures. But it's real easy to estimate where the ball goes into pure roll, beyond 16 inches. And so, Quintic does that. Okay. So
just in terms for our audio phase, the graphic says skid phase, general characteristics. There's the launch phase, the first touch, second touch, third touch. You write there typically 3 bounces prior to pure roll. So I want you to imagine a staircase.
Yeah.
It's like the top floor, then it goes down a level, then it goes down a level 3 times. And the drop off in terms of ball speed is significant from when the ball hits the ground the first time to the second time to the third time, and then eventually to pure roll. And this is eye-popping because I can see now why people habitually leave putts short. It's not just that they don't hit the ball hard enough. I don't think they really understand the fact that, given this information you're sharing, you probably have to hit putts harder than you would think, at least in athletically.
You're a great straight man here for the next couple slides. Okay. So here we are. Now, this is a putt hit on an artificial surface. Now, it doesn't say here, I should have titled it, but this is an artificial surface. And notice after the first touch, okay, there is a 9% drop in speed at both the first and second touch. Now, this is on artificial turf, okay?
Gotcha. Mm-hmm.
And so here we're going to take a look now at pretty much the same length putt hit on real turf, okay?
All right.
Now, do you see what after the first touch, and I've done the math for everybody. We've gone from a 9% drop in speed to an 18% drop in speed. Merely the difference between now these both, these are going to have identical steps too. If you use identical, okay? But these putts are not rolling the same distance.
Exactly right. It's crazy.
Right? Yeah, they're not. This putt on a real, this particular real green had an 8.5-inch skid phase length. And this is on a, real, real green. And so this skid face length is a lot shorter, okay? Because you know, the ball, the turf is grippier. So
Yeah.
here's how I like to explain this. You know how you get new grips on your club. You get the brand new Golf Pride Tour Velvet. Just put them right on your clubs, your irons, and boy, they feel tacky. You just want to rub the fingers
Yeah.
against them. And there's a tack to it. And a year and a half or 2 years later, after your clubs have sat in the trunk and they've gone through extreme heat and extreme cold, one day you go to pull them out of your trunk and they're hard as a rock. The
Yeah.
same, okay,
Mhm.
and it's smooth. Artificial turf, the fibers they don't have any tack to them. Real like blades of grass have this viscous tack to them that grabs the ball differently. Okay.
Mhm.
And that, that
That
creates.
tack, that tack. Quickly as an aside, at Augusta National, you and I were talking about going there. The caddies, because the place is overseeded for the Masters and for playing time, because Georgia's got Bermuda grass, and the caddies call it the glue. And how these, even though these greens are fast and the fairways are fast and the approaches are pretty fast, the ryegrass, the nickname from the caddies is glue, and that's that tack you're talking about. And it's amazing if the grass just gets a whisker longer and there's no moisture to it, the ball wants to stick in that stuff. So it makes chip and runs from off the greens there very, very hard, unless you're in the morning where the ball will sort of skid across that moist surface.
What we're going to talk about extends to wedge play also.
Oh,
Okay.
cool. All right. Lovely.
How
Yeah.
your ball runs out if you hit a wedge, onto an artificial green versus, a real green.
Yeah.
Um, I will point out that every type of grass, fescue, poe, the newer bents, Bermuda, they all they're real greens.
Mhm.
But even within those, subcategories, you'll have different, types, quantities of skid face friction.
Okay.
Now, I don't want to get bogged down in this next uh, screen, but the point here is you just imagine if we just multiply the quantity of skid face friction. And one of the things I do in my kind of techie nerdy, moments is I actually use the Quintic ball roll monitor. I import all the data into Microsoft Excel, and I can mathematically tease out the actual quantitative coefficients of friction, the numbers.
Mhm.
Those are the numbers that go into models that, like for instance, a tour read model or an aim point model or Biv Wadden's, putt trajectory model. And
Okay.
we need to nobody's doing. I'm like the only guy who's stupid enough to spend time on this, but it's a critical, variable, a critical input into these models. And I've just been fascinated with how both the distance and the breaks of the models change when you put these different skid face frictions in.
Yeah,
There's
exactly.
both a length and a volume. So there's a magnitude and a length. And so you might have a shorter skid face length, but because that skid face friction is so much higher, the volume of friction that you have to go through in that shorter skid face is so much higher than what you go through, an artificial turf. So it's not very intuitive, but all you got to know is you got to hit it harder on real turf versus artificial turf. So here's Paul Hurian is he's the architect of the Quintic ball roll monitor,
Mhm.
and these are some. I think Danny Willett hit these putts, and he sent this along to me. These are about the same length, putts, and indoors versus outdoors. So look at the artificial surface. You see this putt. First of all, and it's ball speed on the left axis, the vertical axis.
Yeah.
You don't have to hit it as hard. You don't see as much of a diminution in that skid phase, where you start to see the red curve just kind of like, you know, slow down. It's not very pronounced, right? It doesn't drop that much. And then it starts off slower, and then the remainder is faster.
It's rolling out more, yeah.
Off at real turf, and this is the same guy, same putter, going from indoors to outdoors. You got to hit it a lot harder, and it hits the skid phase outdoors. Do you see how it drops like a rock? The speed drops like a rock.
Yeah, audio listeners, I got to say this. What Biv has done, he's got a graph, and there's real turf, the numbers, or the graph line versus the artificial surface. And the artificial surface was launched at a slower speed. There's barely a drop off, and the decline in speed is basically just a very shallow angle of the graph. On real turf, the ball's airborne in the launch phase, and then there's almost a vertical drop off in speed, and then it just tumbles. I mean, the speed tumbles. It's a massive contrast between the performance of the two.
Massive contrast. And of course, it has to have implications for the break of the putt, right? So
I would say this: go to the break, but I want to say this too. The implications of the stroke that the player makes too. And now this makes so much sense where I will take a player indoors to a mat and the stroke looks rhythmic and smooth and unhurried in transition. And then they get to a green and all of a sudden it looks like they're lurching at the thing to try and get the golf ball to go 30, 40 feet or so.
yeah. And I tell you what, this, by the way, is something that some research that Paul Herian did. All of the bars in blue are artificial surf. They're the skid phase length in inches of a variety of artificial surfaces. Off to the right, you've got the green is for real turf, and you can really just visually the skid phase lengths are double those of the actual green. And if we did a lot of different like actual green, we'd have different skid phase lengths for different types of grasses too.
Yeah. And just to reiterate for the folks, the skid phase is when the ball sort of, because it bounces before it gets into pure roll, is when it's losing most of its energy that was imparted to it at contact.
Yeah, depending on what the material is.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Now, here's where, and by the way, thank you everyone for putting up with the techie foundation. Here's now we can have some fun with this. Okay?
All right.
And this, now I don't teach tour players. I teach, my bread and butter is taking young kids who are in 7th and 8th grade, freshman year in high school, and they're shooting in the low 90s. And my bread and butter is within 6 to 9 to 12 months, taking them from the 90s down to the mid to high 70s. Okay, that's just what I do. Okay. So I'm constantly working with emerging competitive juniors. And the most typical circumstance is, when they have their tournament schedules during the summer. And I'm in Chicago, so we've got our 4.5 month window to get out there and play golf. They got a tournament tomorrow. And the parents, just like telling your young child to go do their homework, you say, get down in the basement and hit putts for 30 minutes before your tournament tomorrow.
Yeah. I might have just done this to my daughter.
Yes. Yes. We unwittingly, Mark, we are all doing it. It's not just you're the golf pro. I'm a golf pro. I did it to my son too. Okay. And so here, just imagine, your 8th graders down there, and man, they just sat there for 30 minutes. And this is at 10 feet, with a 10 stimp and a 2% slope. This is the perfect putt you're hitting. Now, I can enable my model to let the ball, even though this ball goes right in the middle of the hole, I can enable it to not get captured. And I let the ball just go through the hole. So I like to kind of see what happens to the ball if it were to just kind of mythically roll over the top of it. So, and by the way, the green dot is the skid phase length. The blue dot is max, break, and the yellow dot is uh, it's supposed to be where the decay phase begins, and that, by the way, it's just a little off. This is an older this is an older
No stress.
screenshot, but anyway,
I need to do this.
I have a lot of extra uh, metrics that I have designed into this model.
Yeah, give me a sec here for the audio folks. This is a 10-foot putt on a 10 stimp indoors.
Yeah.
And there's a dotted blue line aiming out to the left-hand side. And then there's like, imagine a shot tracer as the ball starts on that line, then goes through the different phases Biv describes as it's curving away from the intended line or the start line towards
And
the
it's a left-right putt.
Yeah.
And now here's two other, this putt is being hit 7.9 inches to the left. The aim is 7, the break margin is 7.9 inches to the left of the left edge of the hole, 10 inches basically versus the hole center. And it's being hit at an initial speed, the ball speed of 2.37 meters per second. You kind of double that if for miles per hour. It's about, kind of, 4.75 miles per hour.
Okay.
So here, your child is down in the basement. They're hitting this putt all night long. Okay. And, oh, Dad, I'm hitting it so good. I'm putting so good. Then they go out the next morning to their tournament. And they put themselves in the same, hypothetically in the same identical 10 stimp, 2% slope. And they hit the same putt they did the previous night. That's the putt they're going to hit. So for the viewers that can't see this, the putt finishes way low right, way short, and way low right. Okay. The ball is not hit hard enough to basically, get itself out of that skid phase window at the right speed to then take the rest of the break, into the middle of the hole. Okay. And there's an adjustment process. So you have to hope that your young competitive junior has, shows up early enough, which they never do, to hit putts for 10 or 15 minutes to make adjustments on the putting green. But they don't even know they need to make adjustments, Mark. They think they're just they woke up on the wrong side of the bed and their timing's off, right?
That's so true, man. You know what? I'm living what
Have you
you're
been there?
saying.
Huh? Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. And so now this last example I just described, is for a young competitive junior, or imagine a D1 player. You're in the North, you're at Purdue, you're at U of I, you're at, Notre Dame, Ohio State, and you're practicing all winter long on these indoor greens, and you're hitting wedges too on them. Okay. You got to get in the plane. You got to go down to Florida and play in a tournament.
yeah.
There's an adjustment process, and it's non-trivial. Okay. So what's been fun, I just tell you a little story. 2 years ago, I presented this at the David Orr annual putting conference.
Yeah.
And Brad Faxon was also speaking at that conference. And he listened to my talk, and it was a much more involved talk about how I go about measuring friction and why that audience. Now, for your listeners, David Orr's annual putting conference, this is about 40 putting instructors from not only the US, but from Europe and Asia that come. And it's basically all of the specialist putting instructors that are nerdy enough to want to spend a couple days, with each other talking about this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so Brad Faxon's there. I finished the talk, and Brad goes, Biv, he goes, come on. He goes, I think if I tried to migrate from an artificial green to a real green. I think I hit 8 putts, and I could adjust like that. And that's when I told him, I go, well, okay, that's you. You're Brad Faxon. But Brad was actually asking kind of on behalf of Rory, because he knew Rory had set up a new artificial green in his home in London and was practicing on it a lot. But he says, Rory's going to make he's going to make the adjustment quickly. And I pushed back on him. And that night, at dinner, a lot of the other instructors, hey, Biv, wow, that was like amazing. You pushed back against Brad. I go, well, look, I know what I know, and I've got both the theoretical evidence, plus the, day-to-day evidence to back it up. So a couple of weeks ago, now, I'm not paying attention to TGL. Okay. Not because I'm not supportive of it. I just been busy in my personal life. I just haven't been paying attention. So Brad calls me out of the blue. He goes, Biv, have you been watching TGL? And I go, no. Tell me what, tell me what they're even doing. So he explains it to me. So, they're all, the course is set up on a screen. It's an indoor thing, but they have to go hit their putts on artificial greens.
Yeah.
So Brad's going, Biv, I have never seen Tiger Woods. And Tiger was featured in the first couple of these. I've never seen Tiger Woods miss so many putts by so much. I'm dumbfounded. And I'm recalling, what you said a couple of years ago and the differences, in artificial versus real greens. And of course, chuckling. So I did this. He was interested in perhaps flowing through some education to Rory on this.
Okay.
And these next two slides are what I created. Okay. Now this is I got on to the TGL replays, and they've got every shot Tiger hit, including all his putts. And it's a multi-level green, and he got caught in the upper part of the green, and he had he hits it, ends up 10 feet past, and he misses the putt coming back. So I modeled that putt he had coming back, and it was kind of a 10-foot uphill left to right putt.
Okay.
And the ball speed and the aim to make that putt are shown here. It's 2.62 meters per second ball speed. And this is slight, like left to right. It effectively it's 1 3/4 right to left, but it's 1% slope uphill. So it's a combo of left to right and uphill.
Okay.
Anyway, I got the aim, I got the speed, and here is just like the competitive junior from 2 slides ago. This is the perfect putt you would hit on a real green outdoors with the skid face assumption, those of a real green. Now you got to remember, all these tour players, they've spent their entire careers on real greens.
Yeah.
They're really not screwing around with artificial greens. Now here's what happens if you take the mindset and your feels and your rhythm and all your speed relationships to the TGL green. And all I did here is I changed the skid face friction assumptions. Everything else is identical, same speed, same aim. And what happens? You miss long, wide.
Yeah.
And all these guys, in the first couple of TGL events, were missing long, wide.
You say that, and now that I think about it, because I've watched a few of them, I find guys, ordinarily when they're around the greens, you've referenced the wedge play. When they're around the greens, they'll hit chip shots and stuff, the makeable ones. And if those makeable ones miss, they're never running at the hole real hard. They're just kind of dribbling, sort of limping at the hole. I've seen multiple occurrences where just from green side, the guys chip just over the apron, the ball's on the green, 3-4 feet by the hole, like in the blink of an eye. And I'm like, wow. And it never really occurred to me that this is the reason why. I thought it had something to do with the spin off the artificial turf or whatever the case might be. Maybe it does.
There is a little bit of an effect there. The bigger effect is, because that artificial turf doesn't have any tack to it.
Yeah.
when that ball hits the ground, it's like sliding against, so if even if the wedge takes 3 bounces before it settles down and rolls out,
Mhm.
the distance between those 3 bounces is a lot longer. Okay. It's a lot longer. And
Yeah.
so, here's something that I'm surprised. I see a large number of chip-ins at TGL, a much greater preponderance of chip-ins there than you do like week to week, watching them outdoors on the PGA Tour. I don't know how many, you're out there all the time. You'll get, I don't know, a half a dozen chip-ins over the course of a tournament, from the,
Mhm.
players. I'm making that up.
No,
I
yeah.
I've seen like one of those guys had 3 in one night. You know,
Well,
it's
you're right. And I would counter with the fact that this artificial green surface is perfect. There are no puck marks from balls landing. There's no heel prints and stuff anywhere. And there was a Tommy Fleetwood pitch shot that he holed in a playoff the other night.
yeah,
Everyone's trying to land the ball short of the slope like they ordinarily would, skip it up there, and everyone's kind of releasing the thing past the hole. It almost looked to me like he mishit his touch. It landed well short, but had enough on it to roll all the way up the hill into the hole. It's like there was, like I
yeah.
said, it looked like a mishit because it landed way short of what he ordinarily would.
Well, if you think about it, they're so used to like hitting those wedges with a certain relationship of first bounce to ultimate rollout, and it's going to be way different on these greens. So you almost have to miss it in order to get a good shot
Right. Well,
before you make the adjustment.
yeah.
Mark, it could be after 4 or 5 events that they do, or that they are making the adjustments out there. I know that, there's been some, and by the way, I haven't, I flowed this through to Brad. He floated through to Rory, but I'm not a part of any of that, and the subsequent discussions. But I do know that Rory knew enough to take the breakout. He had figured out that if I just leave the pin in and hit it hard, you know, that would be a better strategy than trying to think I'm going to die it in at the same type of break that I hit my outdoor putts at.
Well, look, if nothing else, because again, half of our global tribe is in winter. Some folks are going to come out of winter later than others, so there's time spent indoors. And you're right. I'm a big one on information, then understanding, then application for game improvement. There's a massive implication to the application of this lesson for somebody that's coming off practicing on an artificial surface to out there on the golf course. Now, you talk about the professionals. One of the great skills of all the pros, in my opinion, is the ability to adapt on the fly. They do that quickly,
Right.
where most golfers, we're not as gifted as they are. And it's not just ball speed, it's adaptability. So there's a lot in this. So I guess if you were putting a bow on this conversation, it would be to the viewer and the listener to be, if you're practicing on the artificial surface, hit them harder than you think. Is that it?
Yes. So here is a table I put together. Uh, the top numbers are the real green stump.
Mhm.
Okay. And imagine we're gonna try to figure out what should I practice on indoors in order to prepare myself for the stimp that I'm gonna experience outdoors.
Okay.
And uh, you know, remember that when we're hitting on artificial turf, we don't have to hit it as hard, right?
Yes. Mhm.
So uh, what I really have backed out, okay, is that you want to be putting on an artificial surface where the stimp is about 2 feet shorter than what you're experiencing outdoors.
All
Okay.
right. Gotcha.
And it is a way of a bit of a crude way, but it's an effective way to get you to hit it hard enough so that when you do get outdoors, the relationship between the putter head speed and the ball speed that you're practicing on the artificial turf is the same relationship of the putter head speed to the ball speed when you get outside. Okay.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So it's about, you just want to be 2 feet shorter. So if you're if your country club greens are 10 and your basement, carpet, you want that carpet at 8.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what do you think the carpet speed is for most people? Do you think it's 8 or do you think
I
it's
think that's
14?
closer to 12, 13. You know what?
It's 14
I'm,
all day long.
I stand accused here too, because I had a company that built an artificial indoor putting green for me, and the thing came, and I was like, man, this feels slow and sticky.
Oh,
And
good.
yeah, but to a point where I wouldn't use it. But now I wish I'd spoken to you 10 years ago, because I would have, because you're actually preparing yourself for outside. And then I got a mat. The thing runs like the ball's on glass. So
Correct.
so now there's none of that. Well, you can roll a ball 20 feet on this mat I have, but you're just caressing the thing down there. So yeah, you can build a pure stroke, but when you take that to the golf course, it's a different animal now.
Right, right. And you really want to, rehearse. It's the relationship of the putter head speed to the ball speed. You want to be rehearsing it the same way indoors as you're going to transfer it outdoors.
Yeah, beautiful.
And uh and it'll feel like you're putting on a slow green. No question about it.
Yeah.
But you're going to be rehearsing the right thing when you finally get outdoors, you know. And if you don't make this adjustment, you're gonna you're gonna get head faked the next day when you're outdoors. It's and remember, my bread and butter is with eighth graders and freshmen in high school, and they can't adapt the way a tour player can. There's no way. They're still learning, how to putt. All of the remedial aspects of learning how to putt, they're still trying to get that under their belts.
But as you well know, speed is important as anything when it comes to reads of greens.
Yes,
Mm.
yes, yes. So anyway, I had look at and we may have, if we have a minute, I'll touch on going back to the sound biomechanics in the full swing. I can do something short that I think will be interesting to the readers. But I wanted to bring this to this podcast because it does apply to many, many, many players, many of your listeners out there. I
Mm-hmm.
would say probably all of them. It's not well known, and I could do the nth discussion on the full swing with you on your podcast, or I could contribute something that would move the needle for people, in a narrow sense. But putting's important.
Yeah, it's low. I call it low hanging fruit. Let's put a pin on the golf swing stuff, because I got a lot of questions that I want to ask you from your website.
Okay.
We've run a long time here, so let's do this. Let's wrap this. We'll have you back to talk golf swing and biomechanics. But
Okay.
in the meantime, please share for folks where they can find you, maybe where they could see this presentation. Is there a website or social media you operate with?
Yeah. My website is waddengolfacademy.com.
I'm there, and it's great, people. There's good stuff over there. I'm looking at it
Yeah,
right now.
and I apologize. I don't update it as much as I should. And what I am going to do is I'm going to create a post on the website. I'll try to do that sometime today or tomorrow, where I have these slides that people can look at. And of course, the best thing to do is to go to the YouTube video that you're going to follow this with.
Yeah.
And um, I have longer versions of these. When I give these talks at the York conference, they go 3 hours. It gets really in depth, and I don't. That's like way over the top for everybody, even some of the putting instructors. Uh, but I will get this onto a special, you know,
It's
discussion on the
it's
website.
great.
And my phone number for anybody, my email address is all lowercase, biv.wadden@gmail.com. My phone number can be found on my website if anybody wants to call.
And go to the website, Wadden Golf Academy. I'm looking at videos. Yeah, the best putters on tour. What grip style do they use? Then you talk about the takeaway wrist angle transfers. Folks, it's a treasure trove of good stuff. Biv, you've done a tremendous job of making something that could be quite complicated in terms of the phases of the putt and the speeds. You've made it so simple to understand, and I feel enlightened. So thanks for joining us, and certainly thanks for being prepared to share all your research with our global audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me on. I appreciate it.